February 21, 1970. Zürich Airport airliner, Convair CV-990-30 Coronado of Swissair preparing for Flight 330. He will perform a regular passenger flight from Zürich to Hong Kong with an intermediate stop in Tel Aviv. 38 passengers are boarding the aircraft. The flight is operated by a crew consisting of Captain, 45-year-old Karl Berlinger. Co-pilot, 51-year-old Armand Etienne. Flight engineer, 36-year-old Werner Gimme. 6 flight attendants also worked in the cabin. Earlier in the day, the crew completed a flight on the route Zürich-Düsseldorf-Zürich. At 13:14 local time, Flight 330 took off from Zürich Airport, after which it made a left turn and began climbing south towards Gotthard Mountain. But 7 minutes after takeoff, when the plane was passing an altitude of 14,107 feet near Sittel, 25 miles south of the departure airport, the pilots unexpectedly reported to the ground about the depressurization of the liner and requested an emergency landing in Zürich. The air traffic controller instructed to turn onto a heading of 335 degrees, after which Flight 330 made a right turn over Lake Fürwelstedt. But, since the crew was somewhat delayed with the exit from the turn, the plane now followed a course of 060 degree, that is, to the northeast, so the air traffic controller instructed to take a course of 330 degrees, which the pilots performed with a smooth right turn. At 13:24 hours, the crew declared an emergency and reported that they had a fire on board, after which they requested a direct approach. All departures from Zürich were cancelled and air traffic controllers gave Flight 330 full priority to land, but the situation on board continued to deteriorate. Navigational instruments failed in the cockpit, so the pilots had to be guided by messages from the ground in order to take a northwesterly direction to Lake Zürich. Also on board, the electrical systems turned off, and the cockpit began to fill with smoke. The liner flew over Zürich, then turned left, flew over Baden, turned right and headed north again. The air traffic controller warned about deviations from the course, to which the pilots reported that they could not see anything because of the smoke in the cockpit. Having reached the beginning of the Rhine, the liner began to enter an ever-increasing roll to the left, and in the Klingna area it left the clouds. After that, the captain twice transmitted to the ground.
"We are falling. Goodbye everyone. Goodbye everyone."
After another 6 seconds, he ordered the co-pilot to reduce engine power and monitor altitude, but due to strong smoke, these commands were not carried out. Entering an increasingly steep left tailspin, Flight SR-330 made a three-quarter turn before crashing into a forest 14 miles northwest of Zürich Airport at 13:34. From hitting the ground at high speed, the plane exploded and almost instantly collapsed into tiny fragments. The explosion was recorded even by seismographs at the Zürich Institute. All 47 people on board the plane were killed. At that time, it was the largest Convair 990 disaster, until 2 years later it was tripled by the disaster in Tenerife. Also, at the time of the events, it ranked second in scale in the history of Switzerland, and in 2022, third. The investigation noted a similar incident that occurred the day before near Frankfurt am Main. The Sud Aviation AC-210 Caravelle 6R airliner of the Austrian airline Austrian Airlines, board OELCU, was flying from Frankfurt am Main to Vienna, but 20 minutes after takeoff at FL 100, 10,006 feet, an explosion occurred at the bottom of the luggage compartment. There was a hole in the fuselage about 39 inches by 19 inches in diameter, but at that time the rest of the luggage absorbed a significant amount of energy from the blast wave and there was no fire on board. The crew managed to return and land at Frankfurt am Main Airport. None of the 5 crew members and 33 passengers on board died or was injured. During the investigation of the incident with the Austrian Airlines aircraft and the crash of Flight SR-330, it was established that in both cases a bomb exploded in the luggage compartment on board. The explosive devices themselves were disguised as radios, and they were activated by altimeters, that is, explosive devices detonated when the plane was at the right height. Fragments of altimeters were found and shown on TV, after which the police were called by the owner of an instrument store in Frankfurt am Main and said that a few days before the incident, 2 Palestinian students had purchased the same altimeters from him. On a tip from the seller, these 2 students were arrested, and soon, after interrogation of the detainees, the head of the group, Sufyan Kadumi, who was hiding in Jordan, was identified. The bombs were found to have been sent by airmail from Frankfurt am Main to Tel Aviv. The fact that one of the bombs ended up on board a Swissair plane was just a fatal accident. The parcel was delivered from Frankfurt am Main to Zürich, after which it was supposed to be delivered to Tel Aviv by an El Al airline. However, the Israeli airliner was late with its arrival, so the cargo was sent on an associated Swiss flight SR-330. The Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, PFLP, claimed responsibility for the explosions on Austrian Airlines and Swissair planes. As for the detained Palestinian students, the Swiss authorities soon released them, citing their unwillingness to contact Palestinian subjects. In 2000, a Swiss federal court concluded that it could not accurately identify the organizers of the SR-330 flight involved in the incident. In 2016, it emerged that the Swiss authorities had colluded with the PFLP Palestinian organization and committed themselves to closing the investigation and releasing those responsible for the downing of Flight 330, as well as providing diplomatic support to Palestinian organizations, including in the UN, in exchange for the obligation of the Palestinian factions do not attack Swiss installations. After the crash of Flight 330, the Swiss authorities have significantly increased the security of the airports of Geneva and Zürich.